What would you do if you were stuck between your wife and your parents, and both sides expected you to cater to them? Could you find a way to make everyone happy, or would it only lead to endless conflict? Imagine one week, a tiny apartment, a little kitten, and two sides of the family with completely opposite expectations. And this is my family's story. It was a quiet Monday morning, the kind where sunlight sneaks softly through the narrow windows of our 50-square-meter apartment. I stood by the window, watching the streets wake up below, thinking about the week ahead, the week my parents were coming to visit. Excitement and dread collided inside me. Our apartment was small, only 50 square meters, a tiny living room, a connected kitchen, a bedroom, and a sofa that my parents would have to sleep on if they stayed here. I knew they wouldn't like it. My wife, always practical, always looking for the most efficient solution, suggested we book an Airbnb for them. I felt my chest tighten. An Airbnb that meant they'd have to go somewhere else to sleep, while we still cooked, cleaned, and entertained them all day long. The thought alone made me uneasy and frustrated. Our 3-month-old kitten was darting around my feet, jumping onto the sofa, then sprinting back to the window. I remembered how my parents disliked cats. Just imagining their frowning faces if the kitten jumped on their bed made my stomach knot. My wife glanced at me, calm, almost smiling. "Honey," she said gently, "we just need to think about their comfort. They can still enjoy meals at home, spend time with us during the day, but at least they'll have a private space to rest." I shook my head, trying to reason with myself, but a question kept gnawing at me. Could I balance caring for my parents while preserving our own space? And that's when I realized this week was not going to be simple. Every decision, every small action would ripple into tension. I had to choose between family duty and practicality, and in that quiet morning light, a thought sparked in me. Is it even possible to make everyone happy without breaking something or someone in the process? The first text from my mother came in around mid-morning. "Can't wait to see you. Are you ready for us?" My heart sank a little. Ready? In what sense? Ready for the chaos? Ready for the sofa arrangements? Or ready to juggle a week of their expectations, my wife's practical plans, and the ever-present kitten wreaking havoc? I tried to focus on breakfast, but the little furball kept leaping from the counter onto my shoulders, purring loudly as if it sensed my rising stress. My wife was already packing the list for the Airbnb. "We need their favorite snacks, clean towels, and a small fan for the room," she said. I could feel my jaw tighten. "I don't want them sleeping elsewhere," I muttered. She sighed, but didn't argue, simply taking out her notebook and jotting down the plan anyway. As the day went on, I tried imagining how the week would unfold. Every morning, I'd have to wake up early, prepare breakfast, maybe sneak the kitten away before they saw it, make sure every tiny preference of theirs was met. And at the end of the day, I'd still have to watch them sleep comfortably in someone else's space while I slouched on my own couch. It wasn't just inconvenience. It felt like a challenge to my sense of duty. To me, serving them, feeding them, being there for them, which was part of who I was. But the apartment, the Airbnb, the kitten, it all seemed to be plotting against my ability to manage it. The moment they arrived, it became immediately clear that my fears weren't unfounded. Mum frowned at the sofa cushions, adjusting them as if testing whether they could absorb her weight. Dad walked in, glanced at the kitchen, and nodded approvingly, then froze as the kitten darted under the table. "Is that a cat?" Dad asked, eyebrow raised. I froze. "Yes, it's our cat. Our little chaos maker. Yes, I said quickly, but he won't bother you. I promise. Mum gave me a look that could cut glass. We're not really cat people, she said softly. My stomach sank. My wife leaned over and whispered, See? This is why Airbnb might be better. I bit my tongue. I wanted to argue, to explain that a little discomfort for a week wouldn't hurt anyone. But there was tension in every corner, subtle, constant, simmering. Meals became another battleground. Dad wanted coffee the way he liked it. Mum insisted on particular condiments. Every instruction was detailed, every request carefully noted. Meanwhile, the kitten jumped from chair to chair, turning each meal into a minor catastrophe. By evening, my wife and I exchanged exhausted glances. She silently admitted she was right about needing a solution for comfort, but I couldn't let go of my sense of obligation. And that was the beginning of the delicate dance of compromise or conflict. As night fell, I sat alone on the balcony, watching the city lights blur into streams of orange and white. The apartment was quiet for the first time that day. My parents were in the living room, Mum reading, Dad dozing off. The kitten was curled in a tiny ball on the sofa. I thought about the week ahead. I could continue insisting they stay home and serve them endlessly, or I could take my wife's advice and book the Airbnb. Each option carried weight. One felt like duty, responsibility, honor. The other felt like reason, sanity, preservation of peace. I realized that this wasn't just about comfort or logistics. It was about respect for my parents' wishes, respect for my wife's perspective, and respect for my own boundaries. I also realized that compromise wasn't a weakness. It was a strategy, a way to survive a week without resentment, without arguments, and perhaps even with some laughter. Sitting there, I made a mental note. Tomorrow, I'd start a conversation, not a fight, not a lecture, but a real talk about expectations, space, and fairness. I didn't have to win. I just had to find a way for everyone to feel seen, heard, and comfortable, including myself, asterisk. The first morning after my parents arrived, the apartment felt smaller than ever. Sunlight cut through the thin blinds, but instead of warmth, it seemed to highlight every corner, every imperfection. I was up early, trying to prepare breakfast before anyone else stirred. My parents were meticulous. Mum wanted the table set exactly how she liked it. Dad demanded his coffee strong, black, with the mug facing precisely the right way. Every instruction was layered, detailed, almost ritualistic. The kitten, sensing the heightened tension, darted across the floor, almost colliding with Mum's heels. She froze, eyes wide. "Is that cat running around again?" she asked, and I could feel my pulse quicken. I attempted to smooth over the morning. "He's just excited," I said, scooping up the kitten. "He won't bother you." Mum frowned. Dad shook his head. "We're not used to animals indoors," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Meanwhile, my wife had already prepared her counterplan. "Maybe we should have brought the Airbnb key this morning," she whispered to me. I stared at her, clenching my fists internally. Every fiber of my being rebelled at the thought of sending my parents away while I remained at home, duty-bound. But even as I wrestled with my pride, I realized that compromise might be inevitable. Breakfast was tense, almost comical in its precision. Pancakes had to be flipped exactly right, juice poured just so, and the kitten had to be shooed repeatedly. Every clink of a spoon, every misstep, felt amplified in the tight apartment. I could feel my patience fraying, my thoughts oscillating between duty, pride, and the overwhelming exhaustion of maintaining control. By mid-morning, subtle conflicts began to surface. Dad insisted on watching the news in the living room, while Mum wanted to discuss family plans for the day. The kitten, undeterred by human politics, leaped onto Dad's lap, startling him. "Move that cat," he exclaimed, and I froze, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment pass. The small apartment seemed like a pressure cooker. Every decision I made was scrutinized, every action second-guessed. I realized that my initial pride wanting them to stay at home, to experience my care firsthand, was clashing with the reality of cramped spaces and conflicting personalities. Calm voice broke through. "Let's try a schedule," she suggested. "You handle mornings here. We spend afternoons outside. It might be easier for everyone." I resisted at first. The very idea felt like conceding defeat. But the practical side of me knew she was right. I could see it in my parents' subtle sighs and the tension in the air. Perhaps a compromise wasn't surrendered, was survival. Afternoons were worse. Dad wanted to read newspapers. Mum wanted to watch her favorite shows. I tried to accommodate both, but inevitably, someone's preference clashed. The kitten, sensing disruption, continued its antics, slipping under doors, knocking over cups, and pawing at every foot in sight. I noticed my wife, observing quietly. "See," she said softly, "this is exactly why Airbnb is better. They'll be comfortable, and we won't be running on empty all week." My inner conflict deepened. Every instinct screamed to keep them home, to continue serving them as a mark of respect and love. Yet I couldn't deny the rising chaos, the mounting frustration, and the subtle resentment forming on all sides. By evening, tensions had escalated. Mum complained the air conditioner was too cold. Dad grumbled that the food was not hot enough. I tried to appease them, but my own exhaustion began to show. I realized I was no longer just hosting. They were consuming all my mental bandwidth as night fell. I found myself alone in the bedroom, listening to the soft snoring of my parents and the gentle purring of the kitten. The apartment was quiet now, almost peaceful, but my mind was racing. I reflected on the day, the clashes, the small victories, the moments of humor, and the constant tension. I realized that my pride in serving my parents, though honorable in intention, was creating stress for everyone, including me. Compromise wasn't weakness. It was a survival strategy, a way to maintain harmony while still honoring my sense of duty. I knew that the upcoming days would be challenging, and I needed to plan carefully, balancing care, space, and sanity. Tomorrow, I decided I would sit down with my wife, lay out the plan, and negotiate with my parents. It wouldn't be perfect, but perhaps it could be better. And in that moment of quiet, I understood the lesson I had been avoiding. Family happiness doesn't come from control, it comes from understanding, flexibility, and sometimes letting go. The third morning arrived with an uneasy silence. The apartment seemed smaller than ever, the air heavier. I woke up before anyone else, my mind already racing. I could hear the faint purring of the kitten and the soft shuffle of my wife preparing. Breakfast was the first battlefield. Dad wanted eggs scrambled one way, Mum wanted toast perfectly golden. I tried to follow both instructions while keeping the kitten out of the chaos. It jumped on the counter, knocking over the orange juice. "Really?" Mum exclaimed, her voice sharp. "We can't even have breakfast without a mess." Dad grumbled, reaching for the spilled juice. I knew this was going to be complicated. I felt my patience snapping. Every nerve in my body was tense. I looked at my wife, who calmly suggested we try the Airbnb for a day to see if it would ease the tension. No, I said firmly. They're staying here. I will take care of them. The room fell silent, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I realized at that moment that my pride and sense of duty were directly clashing with logic, comfort, and even my own sanity. Later that afternoon, after attempting to clean up the chaos from breakfast and corral the kitten, I finally sat down with my parents. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I want you to be comfortable, but this apartment is small and I'm worried about everyone's stress. Mum's eyes narrowed. We don't care about comfort. We care about spending time together. We came here for you, not an Airbnb. Dad nodded. We just want to be with you. Why is that so complicated? I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to scream, but instead I stayed silent, reflecting on how every action I took seemed to be interpreted as either insufficient or wrong. When I finally turned to my wife, she spoke softly. I just want everyone to enjoy the week without fighting, and that's when the reality hit me. This wasn't just about space, food, or a cat. It was about expectations, love, and the inability of all sides to compromise. By evening, the situation reached full-blown chaos. The kitten jumped from the couch to Dad's lap again, this time spilling his coffee onto the floor. Mum gasped, Dad yelled, and I rushed to clean the mess, slipping slightly on the wet floor. Enough, I shouted, startling everyone. The apartment fell silent, the kind of silence that is louder than any noise. I sank onto the couch, exhausted, frustrated, and filled with guilt. I wanted to please everyone, but it was impossible. The weight of responsibility pressed on me like a physical force. My wife gently touched my arm. Maybe this is exactly why we need to try the Airbnb tonight. Just for one night, to see if it works. I stared at her, the walls of the small apartment seeming to close in. Pride, frustration, love, and exhaustion collided. I realized I had to make a choice, or risk ruining the week entirely. Late that night, I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the soft snores of my parents from the living room and the kitten purring quietly in its corner. I reflected on the day's events, the arguments, the small mishaps, the moments of laughter, the repeated reminders that I couldn't control everything. I understood something fundamental. Family harmony doesn't come from trying to control every detail or serving everyone perfectly. It comes from patience, understanding, and flexibility. I had spent hours attempting to fulfill every expectation, but in the process, I lost sight of what mattered most: connection and empathy. I made a mental plan for the next day. A small trial with the Airbnb, a clear conversation with my parents and my wife, and some personal boundaries to protect my own well-being. This week wasn't just a test of family loyalty. It was a test of sanity, patience, and love. And in that quiet night, I resolved to approach tomorrow with a new perspective. Compromise wasn't failure. It was a way to survive, and perhaps even enjoy the storm of a week spent together. Asterisk. The next morning, after a restless night of thinking, I decided to approach my wife and my parents with a proposal. I've been thinking, I began carefully. Maybe we try your Airbnb idea, just for one night. We can see if it makes things easier. Mum raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting we sleep somewhere else after all the trouble? Dad shrugged. I don't mind trying. Honestly, I'm tired of being on edge all the time. My wife smiled, relieved. It's just one night. We'll still spend the whole day together. It might even be fun. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt. I was surrendering my pride in exchange for sanity and harmony. The kitten, oblivious to all human politics, rubbed against my leg, purring as if approving my decision. That evening, we packed a small overnight bag for my parents and prepared their Airbnb room. My parents entered the tiny apartment and glanced around, slightly awkward but willing to go along. As I walked them to the car, Mum whispered, "You're doing the right thing. We just want to enjoy our time with you." Dad chuckled. "And maybe give the apartment a break from us." The night felt strange, almost surreal. For the first time in days, the apartment was quiet. My wife and I sat together on the couch, watching the city lights glow through the window. The kitten jumped onto our laps, and we laughed quietly. I realized how much tension had been built up, not just from space, but from pride, expectations, and miscommunication. One small change could ease a week of stress. The following day, the trial seemed to work. My parents returned in the morning, refreshed and cheerful. Mum even helped with breakfast, laughing as she guided the kitten away from the toast. Dad shared stories of his experience at the Airbnb, joking about the luxurious bed and the perfect temperature. Their contentment brought a weight off my shoulders. I noticed something crucial. The solution wasn't about winning, controlling, or pleasing everyone perfectly. It was about understanding needs, giving space when necessary, and allowing each person to feel comfortable and respected. The apartment still felt small. The kitten still created minor chaos, but laughter and warmth now filled the rooms. The tone of the week shifted from stress and tension to a sense of shared experience and humor. That night, after my parents had returned to the Airbnb, I sat alone, reflecting on the week so far. I understood that family harmony is not a matter of logistics or rigid schedules. It's about flexibility, empathy, and willingness to adjust. Pride can be a trap, but thoughtful compromise can create genuine connection. I also realized that challenges, no matter how stressful, can bring families closer if approached with patience and care. The kitten curled up beside me, purring, as if signaling approval of this newfound peace. Tomorrow would bring more days, more minor challenges, and certainly more chaos. But for the first time, I felt prepared to approach each moment with calm, understanding, and a willingness to compromise. And in that quiet reflection, I acknowledged a truth that had taken me days to accept. Sometimes, giving a little of yourself doesn't mean losing it, means growing together. The last morning of their week-long visit arrived with a quiet calm that felt almost foreign after days of chaos. Sunlight poured gently through the blinds, highlighting the little apartment in soft gold tones. I woke up earlier than usual, as I had all week, and noticed the kitten stretched lazily on the windowsill, blinking sleepily at me. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of tension pressing on my chest. My parents were awake, moving about with unusual ease. Mum hummed softly as she prepared a simple breakfast, and Dad was laughing quietly at a story my wife had told the night before. I watched them from the doorway, a wave of relief washing over me. This week had been a roller coaster full of pride, frustration, humor, and more than a little chaos, but now, It felt like everything had settled into a fragile, satisfying rhythm. Sitting down at the small kitchen table, I finally allowed myself to reflect. Every spilled cup, every scrambled pancake, every small argument had taught me something. I realized that family, even in the tightest spaces and the most stressful situations, could thrive if approached with empathy and patience. I glanced at my wife, who smiled knowingly. "See, we made it," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I nodded, the tension in my shoulders finally easing. Even the kitten seemed to sense the calm, curling into a ball and purring softly on the table. In that moment, I understood this week had been more than just surviving. A visit it had been about learning, adjusting, and growing as a family. And although the week wasn't perfect, it was ours. The day unfolded with small victories that felt monumental after a week of tension. Breakfast was simple, yet compan cakes were flipped perfectly. Coffee brewed just right, and even the kitten stayed out of trouble long enough for everyone to eat peacefully. Mum laughed as Dad tried to balance a slice of toast on his fork while keeping an eye on the kitten. "Look at you two," she teased. "You've finally learned to coexist with the little troublemaker." I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. For the first time all week, I wasn't juggling stress or mediating arguments. We were just a family, sharing a small apartment, a tiny kitten, and quiet, imperfect moments of joy. My wife caught my eye and gave me a playful grin. "See, sometimes the simplest things make the biggest difference," and she was right. I realized that perfection had never been the goal. Happiness, laughter, and compromise had. Later in the afternoon, after tidying the apartment and preparing for my parents' final evening, we sat together for an honest conversation. "I want to thank you both for being so patient this week," I began. "I know the apartment isn't luxurious, and the kitten isn't ideal for everyone, but your willingness to go along with the Airbnb trial really helped." Mum smiled warmly. "We came here to spend time with you. The apartment, the kitten, none of that mattered as much as being together." Dad nodded, and we learned that sometimes giving a little space makes the whole experience better. My wife added, "This week taught us all about compromise and understanding. It wasn't easy, but we survived, and we actually had fun too." I felt a weight lift from my chest. For the first time, pride, duty, and practicality were balanced out perfectly, but enough to make us all feel satisfied. That evening, as my parents packed their bags and prepared to leave, there was a quiet sense of fulfillment in the air. Hugs were warm, smiles genuine, and laughter easy. "Thank you for everything," Mum said, squeezing my hand. "Next time, we'll bring a bigger suitcase so we can stay even more comfortably." Dad chuckled, ruffling the kitten gently. "And maybe we'll even get used to the little troublemaker here." I watched them leave, the city lights reflecting in the rearview mirror as they drove away. The apartment felt empty, but not lonely. It was a home that had survived chaos, laughter, spilled juice, and stubborn pride and had come out stronger on the other side. Sitting down with my wife, the kitten curled up on my lap, I realized the most important lesson of all. Family harmony isn't about perfection, obedience, or control. It's about flexibility, patience, empathy, and the willingness to meet in the middle even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's frustrating. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I knew that this week, chaotic and exhausting as it had been, had brought us closer together than any perfectly planned visit ever could.